Vandeham Sri Guru.
Just to get started, I wanted to open it up for discussion on words that immediately come to mind when you hear or see the word faith and reason. And when we're talking about reason, from the perspective of rationality, like that. So we'd like to get started. We'll start with reason.
Oh
no. Sorry.
Scientific?
Scientific?
Yeah. A step-by-step methodology where you get an answer. Reason out a particular situation, something like that.
Okay, so when you're talking about scientific method, are you saying specifically like an empirical system?
Yes.
Okay. What else comes to mind when you see reason?
Analytical deduction.
Okay, can I, so analytical deduction. So maybe can I break that into two as in, for analysis and deduction?
Yeah.
Because they're related but not exactly. Experience. Would it be okay if I combine that with deduction? Because based on our set of experiences, we can make certain conclusions based.
It's based on the experience parts. Basically, something has happened and you want to find out why. So deduction, I guess.
Well, you had your hand raised.
Things we perceive through our senses. Okay. Sense perception.
So rationality, sense perception.
I can see something, I believe it. I don't see something, I don't believe it.
Believe what I see. Believe what I see.
Okay. Cause and effect. So maybe can I say logic? Since if we're talking about logic systems, it deals with cause and effect, this to this.
Yeah.
Would that be okay? Okay. That seems like a pretty healthy list to start off with. Now, what about faith?
Axiomatic.
Axiomatic. Does everyone agree with that? Does everyone understand axiomatic?
Not really.
Axiomatic is self-evident truth, like so fundamental that it does not require an explanation or definition, like that. Does everyone agree with that? Does some of you not agree with that?
The word blind has also been associated with faith, blind faith.
Okay.
But then in faith, one should also ask questions, right?
Yeah, when I hear the word faith, the word preceding which comes to my mind is blind. I've heard those two words together always.
So you wanted to throw the word inquiry into the pot? Okay. Is it okay then if I, well, I guess that's sort of related there with empirical.
Belief?
Belief, okay. Can you explain that a little more?
Like, you have this gut feeling that, like for instance, kind of like you somehow guess or you somehow have a gut feeling that what you believe or what you have something to believe in, something to focus your mind on.
Okay. Okay, so you're saying belief from the perspective of something intuitive that may be beyond the realm of rationality. Is that Is that a correct understanding of what you're saying?
Yeah, to a large extent.
To a large extent. I'll have to try harder next time then.
Outcome.
Outcome. What do you mean by that?
Sometimes outcomes brings us faith.
I see, I see. So, maybe then, can I say, reinforced by outcome? Okay. Just because throughout we're going to be referencing some of this language, so I just wanted to make the connections between this and what we're going to be discussing clear. Reinforced by outcome. What about the role of assumptions? Where do assumptions play in this whole understanding of faith and reason?
In reason, you make a basic set of assumptions because you can't cover all the variables and all their possibilities. So you say maybe this, and keeping this as my starting point, I can reason out. Faith is things which you can't really reason out, you assume that they are true, they're there.
Faith is fact.
I'm sorry?
Faith is fact.
Faith is fact.
Yeah.
Does everyone agree with that?
No, we assume that faith is fact.
Oh, you assume that faith is fact.
that it is true.
Okay.
So that's what fact is. Yes.
Okay. Seems like a pretty healthy list for both. So, how I've heard, my understanding, the relationship between faith and reason is that we place faith in everything and anything that we engage ourselves in, and what we place that faith in, the assumptions that we make based on that faith, is creating our understanding of rationality, of reason. Somebody, for instance, who could be atheistic, they place their faith, their assumptions in the idea that if I can't directly perceive, it's not there. Somebody who is more theistic can accept some of those elements, but understand that maybe there's something else working that I can't directly perceive. Now, there's also another point that I want to make about the relationship between reason and faith. How many of you think that we are perfectly rational beings? Okay, cool. So, I'm assuming then you all think that we are not all perfectly rational beings, is that correct?
When you say perfectly rational, what do you mean by that?
We can understand the reason.
Emotions, or we can. Do you mean that we are devoid of emotions, or that we can control our emotions and not let it affect our judgment?
Let's just stay personal, because all it takes is one exception to the rule to break the rule. So, do you feel that you are perfectly rational in every instance of your life? Okay, so there you go. That means not everyone can be perfectly rational then. And that's true. That's true. And there are things that we accept as true that can be presented in a rational or logical manner that maybe necessarily aren't directly empirical. For instance, in past Vedic Vision Society discussions, we've established the position of the soul, that the eternal being, our true nature, is this eternal soul, this body is not. But what experiment, what empirical system can you provide to prove that? All we have is the observation. What's the difference between a living body and a dead body? Like that. So there is that element of faith when we understand the logical progression to arrive at that conclusion, though it can't be, let's say, approached by the scientific method, by our own ability to understand. Now, one thing Abella contributed, that reason or rationality can be assumed by our sense perception. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to erase this because this takes a lot of space. So, but we'll remember those things. So, who remembers if we see? So when we rely purely on sense perception to establish our understanding of reason or rationality, we are relying on the capabilities of our senses, our mind, and our intelligence. And if you may remember from past discussions, what's the problem with that? I mean, it's got to be, if I can see it, if I can perceive it, you know, it's all good, right?
Faulty senses.
Faulty senses. Okay, so the senses are limited.
Different things to different people.
That is true. So, another way to say that is that, well, first of all, it's in the relative realm. And second, because we have limited senses, for instance, you know, our parents aren't physically here, but we know that they're still existing. You know, just because we can't see them or directly perceive doesn't mean they're not there. So like that, even that gross example shows the limitation of the senses that we've been given. And because of those limited senses, we are prone to make erroneous conclusions. Our conclusions are erroneous or faulty. We make mistakes. So based on this faulty data input, we can say we have faulty output, faulty assumptions. And when that happens, we come under illusion. So maybe you can think of this in a, I guess you could say a very common instance where you say, oh, I thought you said like this, but actually you said like this, or oh, I could have sworn that, you know, you were wearing a red jacket, not a blue jacket, like that. So it's not necessarily that it's anything, let's say, malicious. It's just that because of these limited senses, that propensity to make mistakes, we become confused because we aren't able to see things clearly, like that. And the common outcome of these three faulty inputs is a cheating propensity. Meaning, I know my senses are limited, I know that I come to erroneous conclusions, but I'm still convinced that I am seeing things perfectly as they are. I am right, and you're not, so you better listen. That's the cheating propensity. Because I'm acknowledging the shortcomings, but I'm still firmly convinced that what I'm saying is fact, is absolute. And that's not the case. So there are three processes with which we acquire knowledge. And the first one, does anyone remember the three methods of acquiring knowledge? Let's start with the empirical side of things. What's the most, well, let's just say what's the most gross or common way that we acquire knowledge?
Direct sense perception.
Yes, direct sense perception. So, in Sanskrit, that is called pratyaksha. And I'll put in parentheses direct. So we just examined the shortcomings of direct perception, relying on direct perception of things. Because we may get some idea of what's happening around us, but we don't get a complete picture of what things are, how things are, as they are. Now, the next is
By coming to conclusions, by observing something and
by observations, by coming to conclusions. Another
deductive,
word we can
anuman.
deduce is, yes, anuman, but, you know, if there's direct, there must be
Indirect.
indirect. Yes. And that is anuman. So, for an example, where there's smoke, there must be
Fire.
whether or not we can directly perceive it. Yes. Or if we see a mother and a child by the process of anuman or indirect conclusions, there must be a...
Relationship.
Well, if there's a mother and a child, there must be a father. Yes. So like that. But again, there are limitations to that indirect conclusion. Because as we described in what is reason, what is rationality, our ability to make those conclusions relies on our past experiences, as some of you were sharing. It relies on our limited, not just sense perception, but our limited intelligence, our limited mind, our limited capacity to understand things as they are, like that. There was an example given earlier this semester, I believe. How do I find out who my father is? And, I'm sure some of you know the answer to that. But the empirical system is, okay, I'm going to, first of all, narrow down the human population to males. So that's good, I knocked off half of them, which is helpful. And I'm going to knock out anyone who's under 18 years of age, because, well, it's Kali Yuga, so maybe we can say 14 or 15 years of age that are older than me. And now I'm going to go all around the world and interview every single male that falls within that criteria. And who can see some problems with my great plan? It's time consuming. That's a good point. Who else? Money. Yes, that's true. I need a lot of money, so I hope you brought your wallets. And how do I know I'm going to reach every single male out there? What if the person who's my father is dead by the time I get to his village or his neighborhood, his part of town? Like that. So already there's so many flaws in my empirical system of finding out who my father is. Or what if my father is inaccessible? I will never reach there. What if I die before I'm able to reach that part? Like that. The simpler solution is to ask my mother. And that is the third method of acquiring knowledge, which in Sanskrit is shabda, or sound. Hearing from a source, the Vedas, that is beyond these four deficiencies, that is beyond limited perspective, that is beyond making false conclusions, that is beyond illusion, and is beyond cheating. Like that. So the Vedas are compared to our mother, because the Vedas give us the answers to understand who we are, the soul, our relationship with God, and how to realize that relationship with God. So like that. And one can say, how do I know that the Vedas are this perfect source, beyond the four defects? I think, or I've heard, that some very, very intelligent people, thousands of years ago, got together, some very well-qualified brahmanas, and wrote down this body of knowledge that we call the Vedas. But there's some shortcomings in making an assumption like that. First of all, if it was made by an ordinary human, like us, then it would still fall into these four deficiencies, like that. But what we've seen with the Vedas and what was described in the discussion 3 weeks ago, the horrors of the Iron Age, is that the Vedas, which were actually compiled 5,000 years ago but have existed long before that, are still just as relevant today. They're beyond time, they're beyond place, they're beyond circumstance. As time goes on, the externals, the situations we see around us change, but the value and applicability of that knowledge never changes. So automatically, we understand that the Vedas, which come to us through Shabda, through sound, through that perfect transmitter of this knowledge, that is the way to understand what is true knowledge. Now, one thing I wanted to ask, does anyone remember the definition of knowledge that we had established? And I'm talking about absolute knowledge rather than relative.
Knowing things as they are.
Knowing things as they are, yes. So that's why it's very, very important that when we receive this knowledge, this transcendental knowledge of being able to see things as they are, that we need this transparent medium that can show us things as they are, when they have practical realization and have also realized those teachings and received those teachings from a teacher. So it goes back. If you remember, there's the Sanskrit word parampara, or disciplic succession, of teacher, student, And it goes all the way back to the absolute source of the Vedas, Krishna. Now the Vedas are eternal, and they are concomitant with Krishna because of their eternality. These are actually the words of Krishna explaining how things are as they are. So like that, there is that faith that we understand the value of the Vedas and how it explains everything around us. So by Shabda, by hearing, by receiving this knowledge, these words, we automatically can also put these other two processes in place, Pratyaksha and Anuman. Once we receive that knowledge through the process of hearing, we can start to make observations, make conclusions, because we have that proper perspective to see things as they are. And these then reinforce what we have been hearing, and that deepens the faith. So what you were saying about reinforcing by the outcome. We try something, and it turns out exactly as Vedas are saying. One thing that I've heard that I thought was really, really nice is also proof of the Vedas' eternality and beyond the four defects, is that whether or not you believe in the Vedas, whether or not you follow the Vedas, whether or not you know about the Vedas, you're still perfectly following according to action, reaction, your activities, what happens. So like that. So when we receive this sound, we become carriers of that consciousness and the sound that we receive. So like that. So there is that inherent faith, and what the Bhagavad Gita defines as faith is the soul's eternal relationship with Krishna, with God. And the faith is what guides or governs our activities, allows us to perform activities within our journey back to Krishna. So inherently the soul is pure, as we had established. But there are coverings, there are filters. If you remember a few weeks back, there were starts with the word three. Modes of nature. Yes. Who said that? Oh, thank you. Yes, there are the three modes of nature. And who remembers the three modes of nature, or at least one of the modes of nature? Goodness, yes. Passion, I heard.
Ignorance.
Ignorance.
Yes. So these act as filters over the true nature of the soul, the true faith of the soul. They get in the way of our relationship. And according to whatever mixture of the three modes of nature we have, we place our faith accordingly. That's why, even at different times of the day, we may respond to a situation or perceive a situation a certain way, but later on in that day, our understanding or perspective is totally different. So, when we have faith in the mode of goodness, there are certain characteristics associated with that faith in the mode of goodness. So, for instance, one is into, let's say, higher subject matters. Like, I acknowledge that there is some higher power, and I'm subservient to that higher power. So, atheistic, in the sense of placing faith in higher beings. Faith in a higher power. And then there is faith in the mode of passion. So, faith in the mode of passion, that's characterized by taking who we would attribute to have godly qualities and placing it on an ordinary person like you or me. So, think of some Bollywood star, like Michael Jackson or something like that, and you see, well, before he died, now nobody will really care if he was there. They'd probably scream. But, there would be throngs of people, they'd be shouting, some would even swoon and faint, like that. So that's faith in the mode of passion. And what another characteristic of mode of passion is selfishness. So it's all about me, and it's all about wanting to gain. So we see these let's say supposed or fallible role models. And we think, okay, I'm going to place my faith in working hard, earning lots of money, getting a successful career, getting a nice degree, like that. But the outcome of that is temporary. Another aspect of faith in the mode of passion is that we become so focused on endeavoring for our own interests, for our own gains, that if somebody comes to you and says, would you like to hear about God? Would you like to hear this knowledge of the Vedas? Or any theistic religious tradition, we'll say, no, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy, like that. And it's true, we really are too busy, because our faith is not aligned with receiving that knowledge. We're not able to receive this shabda in the mode of passion. So here's another story I heard related to this. So there was a young man, about your age, and he was getting really interested, coming at least weekly to similar gatherings to like you're all here for. And his father, he became very concerned, because it's nice if you go to temple or church, whatever, worship once a week, but don't get too involved. That's for old people, like that. And so the father expressed this concern to his son, and there was a little disagreement. And so eventually the son and father went to see the devotee that was leading this discussion. And the father was expressing, my son should not be getting so into this. You should not be encouraging him in this direction. This is for old people. Once you're over 50, then you can start becoming religious, start exploring spirituality. And the devotee responded, well, okay, fine, your son can go, but you look to be over age of 50, you should come and join our classes, like that. And the father was like, oh, no, not for me, no thank you. So that's true, no matter what age. This process is not for old people. I mean, it's for anybody, but it's not meant to take up when you're old. First of all, there are a few, who's going to say we're going to live to that point in time? Like, oh, I got a good career, but I died just before then, so darn. That's not a responsible life. The other thing is, consider all of these impressions that we cultivate, even at this age, strongly affect the outcomes many, many decades later. Where our consciousness now influences the consciousness in the future. So it's naive to suggest that we're doing one thing now and I will be able to switch 20, 30, 40 years later. How many 50, 60, 70-year-olds do we see actively for the first time taking up spiritual practice, honestly? It's what we do now that affects what happens in the future, which is why it's so important to be exploring this as early as possible. And then there's also faith in the mode of ignorance, where we place our faith in persons or things that are destructive or have destructive tendencies. Also placing our faith in a whimsical manner, acting in a whimsical manner that is either against or independent of the prescribed system of faith, of worship. So like that. So one thing I want to address also in this nature of faith is this statement, this blind faith. Now, some may agree or some may disagree that faith, or those initial assumptions that develop our sense of reason, may or may not be blind. But true faith, according to the Vedic understanding, cannot be blind. Because when we're talking about blind faith, we're talking initially about, maybe some sense of higher cause. So for instance, I firmly believe that, in democracy or human rights or animal rights or butterfly rights, whatever, like that. But as soon as this figure that we look up to, may have a fall down, may do something, some activity that goes against the principles that espoused, immediately our faith is shattered. That sense of faith is shattered. But that's not the true nature of faith. Faith is inherent to the soul. And the soul is full of knowledge, full of bliss, and eternal, as we had described. So because faith, in its true sense, is intrinsic to the soul, anything that is temporary cannot be a true or absolute faith, because it's always shifting. Now, one thing I also wanted to clarify, when we were talking about the relationship of faith and our understanding of faith as a set of assumptions that describes how we reason. Just to give a very glaring example of how just a simple shift in faith can completely change our understanding of what is rational and what is reasonable to perceive. So, this Milky Way galaxy, for instance, the galaxy that this Earth planet is in like that, it's, as of now, described to be about 100,000 to 120,000 light years in diameter. So it's about this big. No, I'm kidding. It's not. It's much, much bigger. But the method with which that conclusion was arrived at, and the method with which all of modern astronomy's mapping is arrived at, is primarily based on this phenomenon called the redshift or the blue shift. Well, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's based on a system of measuring waves that indicate or imply relative speed or distance between two objects. So if my equipment is showing a blue shift, that means the object is coming closer to me. If it's showing a shift in the red spectrum, it means it's going away. So based on that, scientists have deduced this map of the galaxy, the solar system galaxy, and the universe, like that. However, there are some outliers in astronomers who have found that, for instance, two interstellar objects that are very, very close to each other have extremely different redshifts, implying that there may be another source of that redshift. So to take it back a step, the faith or the assumption is in the infallibility that red and blue shift imply relative speed and relative distance. But now comes this other research that shows that, well, it may not be indicating relative speed and relative distance entirely. And so what does that mean for the process of reasoning that gave us the map of the known universe, the known galaxy? It's torn to pieces if that is widely accepted. But for now, through the process of scientific filtration, that still hasn't happened yet, but give it about 50 years. Because filtration tends to end when the scientists proposing those certain theories die, and then a new breed comes along to outdo the previous. But that usually happens. So just a simple change in faith can have enormous outcome in what we understand to be reason or rationale. So faith is the foundation, and our perception, our ability to see in a rational manner, is directly related to where we place our faith. And so that's why I was stressing that it's important to place our faith in the true sense of that word, in something that is eternal, something that is infallible, like that. So when the Vedas are presenting this knowledge, the absolute knowledge of things as they are, it's given to us in a rational manner, in a manner that is logical, through a lot of use of examples or analogies. And that makes it easier for us to understand because we have that limited sense perception. And that's why it's important through the process of hearing to internalize and practice this knowledge that we've received. So on that note, I would be very happy to entertain any questions. And thank you very much for your kind attentiveness. Yes,
Tell an example of the last sentence. The Vedas are giving something.
Okay, so let's say like this material world is an ocean of faults, or an ocean of miseries, like that. It's to help us understand that this is not a good place, so we should get out of it and go to a transcendental or the absolute platform. That's just a really simple example. Avila, do you know another good sort of analogy or example that helps to illustrate a more abstract principle?
Well, I can just expand on that
Okay.
point that you mentioned. To us, when we go on a day-to-day life, it feels like life isn't too bad. Things look good. We have nice cars, nice gadgets. We are progressing. But the Vedas say it's ocean of fall. It's a lot of suffering. And we talked about the Iron Age. And it was very, very clear that as consumers, there is something, but at the corporation level, there's something else. There's a lot of expectation from a boss perspective, from society perspective, government perspective, and things are degrading over time. But from our own vision, from a very myopic perspective, that's not visible. Vedic perspective, if we actually see it, you can prove it. So that's the Shabda versus Pratyaksha. Does it make sense?
I have a question. Suppose someone comes and tries to learn the Vedas. At that point, he doesn't have any proof that it works or something. So he places it faith in that. Would that be blind faith? Because he hasn't seen any proof. He doesn't know that it has been transmitted without any changes down the ages. We don't even question that aspect.
So there is some
What
initial
would you
faith
say?
that is
Huh.
required, but if we tried to, let's say, read the Vedas in our own little bubble, it would just become a scholarly exercise. It wouldn't lead to transformation of character. So in that sense, the faith would not initially develop. And that's why this process of shabda, of sound, is so important. Because there are people who are PhDs in Bhagavad Gita, who are PhDs in Bhagavatam, and specific, very esoteric leelas like that. But they have no conception that, God is a person. So there's a difference between coming in contact with this absolute knowledge from, let's say, an independent or scholarly perspective, versus having the qualities of a student and receiving it from one who has also properly received and realized that knowledge. So there is initial faith, but it also requires the association of people who already are sincerely pursuing in a bona fide process.
So to continue the question, when you say reinforced by outcome, can that outcome be to someone else also? Someone else's outcome? My guru was in so and so position, then after he learned and he started applying, this is the transformation in his life. So
Yes.
It must be true. I mean,
That's part of the power of association.
Okay.
Because we can see, as you were saying, some sincere practitioner of this process, where are they now? What is their character? What are their habits? What are their propensities? Are they genuine in that, in their character? Or is it just a facade like that? So we can judge the efficacy of a process based on the results, based on the qualities that it awakens within people who have already been practicing for some time. I mean, if I can share the example of when you stayed that winter break. So, for instance, Avella was fortunate enough several years back to spend winter break with the regular speaker Nityananda Prabhu. And that was for him an especially strong faith-building exercise, because prior to that the relationship was extended conversations and just coming to this class like all of us are doing. But in that environment he got to see that everything that was being spoken and taught in these classes, in their discussions, was practically implemented in that home environment, which is normally, a more intimate space where you can sort of let loose like that. But there was no deviation. And there was also the outcome of happiness, there was tolerance, there was respect, there was humility, there were all these wonderful qualities exhibited. So like that, that builds the faith because we see the outcome. Does that
thank you.
properly represent?
Yeah. I just wanted to say, he started with blind faith. So that's what you exactly said. It's not blind faith. In fact, when we get on an airplane with blind faith, we know that we are hoping the pilot knows how to land and take off, so that we won't crash. But with Vedic knowledge, it's never blind faith. At least it shouldn't be blind faith.
What I feel is faith should gradually develop to the discipline succession of the parampara, from the source to the next teacher, then till the last chain of the discipline succession. Because we can't directly fix our inherent faith by ourselves. So the source should help us to fix our faith. Is that correct?
That is true. And one thing I forgot to mention is that even to receive this process of hearing, we have to be cultivating a lifestyle that is in the mode of goodness. Because, as I mentioned, if one is situated in placing their faith in the mode of passion, the idea is, I don't have time for these higher spiritual topics. If one is in the mode of ignorance, it's the antithesis of a spiritual life or a mode of goodness life. It's unclean, it's destructive, it's to the self and to others, like that. So we have to cultivate a mode of goodness lifestyle. It's like the difference between being in a completely dark room, not really doing anything because you have no conception of what's around you, what's happening, versus being in this room with the lights on, like mode of passion. You do some activities, clean the desks, pass the clipboard around, like that. Versus mode of goodness, where you can see the window outside the spiritual world, let's just say. It looks better than that, but, you know, just for examples. You can see everything that's going on around you, but you have a proper conception, that's where I want to be. And at that point, we have sufficient faith to receive this knowledge through hearing. So does that sort of reinforce or build off of properly what you were speaking of? And that comes through hearing from the bona fide source.
So, how can a devotee apply this if he or she is in a home where his or her family argues all the time and there's all sort of chaos in the home? How can a devotee apply all these things, even then?
I don't feel qualified to answer that. Bella?
We can talk during Prashant's statements.
Question. Like, don't you think pratyaksha and shabda are kind of like interrelated? Because pratyaksha is sense perception, and hearing is also kind of, you are using one of your sense organs to basically grasp that knowledge. So, don't you think they are kind of like interrelated and could be bracketed in the same
There
class?
is a little bit of relationship, but not as close as it may seem. So pratyaksha is, I'm going to find out, I'm going to, it's like I'm going to climb the ladder to see everything as it is. Shabda is, I'm placing myself in a subservient position, I'm receiving. So one is, I am actively endeavoring to get, the other is, I'm actively endeavoring to receive. Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
So, that may seem a little subtle, but there's a world of difference. Because one, we're relying on our own strength, on our own capacity to do things. The other, we're relying on the mercy of others to share what they have received with us. So it's a totally different quality at work. Okay. Thank you so much. And now, I guess we can start with the highlight of the afternoon, prasada, which was very, very nice. The temple cooks were very enthusiastic today. Today's a very special day. It's the disappearance day of the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Srila Prabhupada. So in honor of that, a big feast was prepared, and we were fortunate enough to get some of